Hello. For almost as long as there has been a Games Workshop, there has been a White Dwarf. The magazine has published battle reports, scenarios, painting guides, catalogue pages, rules, stories, and so much more in its 40 years and 500 issues. My guest today is Lyle Lowery, former managing editor of White Dwarf for roughly the last 7 years and 80 issues. After first starting at Privateer Press, creators of Warmachine and Hordes, and managing their magazine, No Quarter, Lyall jumped to the pond to take over the reins of White Dwarf. He was the last person to hold the role of managing editor at the magazine, at least for now, since it has moved to a brand new publishing model. We talk about the production cycle of White Dwarf, the historic role of the managing editor in that process, and the innovations and changes that have happened during Lyle's time in charge of the magazine. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with former White Dwarf editor Lyle Lowery. Lyle, thank you so much for joining me to chat about your career across a number of different gaming magazines. And we're going to talk, I think, a lot about White Dwarf. But before we get into that, I would love to understand and just hear a little bit about what got you into wargaming in the first place.
Sure. And thanks for having me, Jordan. If you want to go way back to the beginning of how I discovered wargaming, for me, it started, I was a scale model hobbyist.
Right.
And I really loved building. World War II airplanes was mostly my thing, a little bit of tanks and cars as well. And I was in our local hobby shop, and they had just like a small little section of Warhammer, which is the first time I had ever seen it. And what really grabbed me about it was these were basically like scale models that you could play a game with. And I thought that was so cool because like once I finished building, a World War II plane, it was done, right? Like I didn't have a ton of spaces to display them, so they often ended up getting packed away. And I was like, well, that was fun, but now they don't serve a purpose anymore. And Warhammer was a way to play games with models, and I thought that was just an incredible idea. So that was my introduction, and ever since then, I spent my science fair winnings one year on the core set for second edition of Warhammer 40K, and the rest is history.
Amazing. Yeah. Do you remember what factions you were playing back then?
I do. It was orcs and blood angels because that was what was in the box basically.
Sure.
And my basic understanding, my primitive understanding of the game back then was because the box had Space Marines on the cover. I mean, they had Blood Angels on the cover. I had to paint my Space Marines as Blood Angels, so I never gave it a second thought. That was my chapter from the jump.
Right. Yeah, that's great stuff. And that box set, I mean, what an important like 40K box it was, right? That really set the stage for 40K to grow into what it would become. Amazing. Amazing set. But then at some point you actually started working professionally in the industry, right? What led to that?
I did. It's kind of an interesting path. So I was actually in law school. And while I was in law school, I was working in a game store, to help pay for my tuition and everything. And I really got into a game called Warmachine then, which was a really popular competitor to 40K, especially in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And I got into it big time, and one of our regulars in the store was also really into it. And they had a program called the Press Gang where you could be an official, like volunteer demo person, run tournaments and events, stuff like that. And he and I both applied, and he got it, and I didn't. And he only had sort of room in our little city for one press ganger, which was cool because like he was probably the better event organizer for the job, and that was great. But what he was a freelance illustrator who was already working in the industry, doing a lot of work like illustrating board game boards and various art and stuff. And ultimately, he became the creative director of Privateer Press.
Wow.
And um, after I decided I didn't want to be a lawyer after I graduated law school, I practiced law for a little bit, but decided it wasn't right for me. They had a job posting for the marketing manager position at Privateer Press. And I got in touch with my friend, Ed Burrell is his name. Got in touch with Ed and I said, I'm thinking about applying for this job. What do you think? Is that crazy? I actually think I have like the skills they're looking for. What do you think? And he was like, I really think you should go for it. Um, you know, we'll see what happens. So I applied for it and I got the job. And Ed says that he didn't pull any strings. He obviously said, like, have a look at Lyle's resume. I know him, he's a quality guy. But he said he didn't pull any strings. I don't know if that's true or not. Probably not, because I ultimately got the job. And for 4 years, I was the marketing manager at Privateer Press. And then I became the editor-in-chief of their in-house magazine, No Quarter.
Right. Yeah, of
And then it was a much more natural transition, I guess, from editor of their magazine to the editor of White Dwarf,
sure.
obviously the mothership magazine of them all.
Sure. That's fascinating then. So, I mean, how different was a role in marketing and managing marketing to being a lawyer? That feels like it would be, I imagine there's transferable skills, but is it quite a different day to day, right?
Oh yeah, it's absolutely really different. And I actually leaned more on my undergrad degree for that because I had a mass communications degree.
Right.
And marketing is really all about communication.
Hmm.
So it was a lot of understanding that stuff that I learned principally in mass communications classes and stuff like that, and just making sure that our communications with the customers and the public were authentic and genuine and timely and complete.
Hmm. Sure, yeah. I mean, it must have been a really interesting time to be at Privateer Press as well, because that, like you say, it really grew into a rival for 40K during that period, right? There was a point in time where it felt like, okay, this is going to be the real alternative, the long-term
Mhm.
alternative for 40K. What was it like being on the inside of that?
It was incredible. I mean, it was a relatively small operation when you compare it to Games Workshop, of course. And it always felt like we could kind of do anything because we were a small group that was really punching above their weight and creating something that I think was just as good and in some ways better than what Games Workshop was doing at the time. And we took an immense amount of pride in doing that as such a small operation.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, because things like the organized play space, it feels like there was a lot of almost first mover stuff with Warmachine that kind of led the charge that would later be adopted into 40K and then Age of Sigmar as well later on. That
Absolutely.
you really did like blaze a trail. It feels like.
Yeah. And for a while, uh, in places like Adepticon, there were more people playing War Machine than were playing, like, for example, fantasy battles.
Right.
And the only thing bigger at Adepticon was 40K. And that was pretty incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. Very impressive. And then No Quarter as a magazine. What was that like? Because that was the in-house magazine for Warmachine, right?
hmm so it was great. I loved working on No Quarter. It was in terms of people who worked on it, like as the No Quarter staff, it was tiny. It was just me and one other person.
Right.
I had an assistant editor um, named Josh Cologne, and obviously we had loads of people contributing both in the business and as guest contributors from the exterior as well as freelance, etc. And we had people who part of their time they did the graphic design of No Quarter, or part of their time was writing content for the magazine, etc. But
Mm.
as far as a full-time staff, it was just me and one other person. And yeah, that was great. We we were so involved in the magazine business from top to bottom. I mean, that included, dealing with the printers and quoting and sourcing materials and sort of managing the subscription distribution. I mean, it was like running the whole business in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
So just getting that sort of breadth of experience was really cool.
Sure, yeah, I imagine it would be. And I guess a lot of stuff that would later be relevant in the White Dwarf role as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, do you remember what the sort of peak like sales and circulation was for No Quarter during your time?
So yeah, I think we peaked in my time. I'm not sure before my time.
Hmm,
I think we peaked at my time about a circulation of about 10,000 copies a month.
right.
Um, so a decent size for a niche hobby magazine, not
Sure.
not quite on the scale of White Dwarf, of course. But yeah, pretty good numbers for such a niche little thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, that seems quite impressive. I mean, you hear about like comic books, like top comic books that don't even get to those kind of numbers, especially now, right? But
Right,
even
exactly.
even many years ago, it still would sound like quite a good circulation to be achieving there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Was there any like difference in the perception? Because am I right in thinking that most of Privateer Press was US based as an
Yeah.
organization? Yeah. Was there any
Yeah, Privateer
difference?
Press, as far as the staff, was mostly US based. Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So it's kind of a, like especially if you're going to Adepticon, it's a homegrown, successful miniatures war game, right?
Mhm.
Did that have a difference when you looked like over the pond to 40K and Games Workshop being UK based? Was there any impact from that across the US?
Yeah, there was some of that. I think it was more, it had less to do with it being the game from the home country and more to do with the Privateer Press staff and crew being much more hands-on and much more interactive directly with the customers. So at Games Workshop, most of the staff is discouraged from interacting with customers really.
Right.
But at at Privateer Press, we were all at all of the conventions and we were all at events and things like that. And we knew, you know, many regular players on a first name basis and, you know, evenings after the convention, drinks and dinner, all that kind of thing. So we were really accessible and we were really, a part of the community a lot more than I think like you're sort of able to do at Games Workshop. And I think that was what made the connection with the players to the company so deep at Privateer Press.
Right, sure. And there was a real, and I know Warmachine is it's like coming back, and it's sort of that continues to evolve and change. From your perspective, like having seen some of the peaks and troughs of Warmachine's history, is there anything you sort of have reflected on looking back at it, like where it went right and maybe where it went wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I think there were some things that certainly happened that derailed War Machine's meteoric climb. One of them was the I don't remember the name of the store chain. I think it was maybe Hobby Town USA or Hobby USA or something. There was a big chain of hobby stores in the United States that went bankrupt and shut down their whole chain.
Right,
And they weren't like a particularly big distributor of War Machines specifically, but what they were was like the main customer of some of the big distributors in America, the big
right,
hobby games distributors. So when they went out of business, it was a massive hit on the business of the distribution chain. And so what happened was these distribution chains were suddenly fighting to survive, and and in doing so, they basically like stopped buying their normal quantities from game companies like Privateer Press. And when the distribution chain suddenly stops buying your products, for Privateer Press, that was a big hit. There was also a case, uh, like a jury case in the United States with Wizards of the Coast
right,
against one of their judges. And the judge basically sued Wizards of the Coast, saying that he was he was owed money for employment, even though he was like a volunteer or whatever.
right.
um, and that he should have been paid for it or whatever. And he ultimately lost that case. But there was a big chilling effect on volunteer programs across the industry. And privateer press was affected by that as well.
Hmm.
And so privateer press kind of like put on hold and shuttered their press gang program,
Right.
which was our volunteer program. And that hurt us quite a bit because the press gang was such an important part of how we connected with our customers. They were our representatives to the world, basically, to the local game stores and whatnot.
Hmm.
And when we lost that connection, yeah, it was very, very sad, and it was damaging.
Sure, yeah. It's fascinating to think how interconnected the sort of economies of all of these different aspects of running a miniatures business actually are. Like with the changes to the supply chain, having all of these knock-on impacts, and a legal case over here changing how business happens over here is
Yeah,
fascinating. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
I guess one of the strengths of Games Workshop has been for the longest time is how vertically integrated it is, and there's less, not no, but less dependence on other companies and external like elements of that chain, isn't there?
right, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So what led you to move away from No Quarter and Privateer Press and come over to work on White Dwarf?
Well, my wife and I were both really excited about the idea of living abroad. And like I said earlier, when it comes to the industry, Games Workshop, White Dwarf, they're the mothership. So I mean that's how I got into the hobby. I was a White Dwarf reader growing up. In some ways, when I was a kid, White Dwarf was the main way I could interact with the hobby because it was the part of the hobby I could afford as a kid, you know?
Sure.
So it's it was almost a no-brainer because it's in terms of prestige, it's an obvious step up. And yeah, who could pass that up?
Sure, yeah, fair enough. So it was the US edition, is that right, that you first took on?
No, I came straight to the
You came
UK
straight.
and
Oh, fantastic! Yeah. So, what was your remit stepping into that then? Like, you were brought on as the managing editor. What were you expected to do in that role?
yeah, so they were familiar. Games Workshop was familiar with our work at Privateer Press with No Quarter Prime, which was the relaunch of the magazine.
Hmm.
And we relaunched it in a way that made it more integrated and essential to Warmachine and Hordes. So it was a lot more game material in there, more codex type stuff you'd find in the magazine, and more playable content as well. There was always a mini game in every issue, and there was always basically a mini codex that introduced a new subfaction or something like that.
Right.
And it was a really good magazine that was like all killer, no filler, no ads, no catalog. It was just like a game supplement, basically.
Hmm.
And that was what Games Workshop was looking for at the same time because they were looking to um, integrate White Dwarf into the game publication studio, structurally speaking,
Right.
and to sort of get rid of the stigma or illusion or whatever that, or reality in some cases, that White Dwarf was sort of more of a marketing vehicle or a catalog or whatever, and make it more of that sort of essential companion to the game. And that's where I came in.
Right. Great. Yeah. So, because what year would that have been that you were stepping into that role?
That was the very beginning of 2019.
2019. Right. Yeah. So,
Mhm.
I mean, I guess White Dwarf itself had been through a number of changes relatively recently, right? They'd done White Dwarf Weekly and then stepped
Correct.
back into a monthly magazine, and there'd been attempts with like visions and things like that, right? To separate out certain elements of content. Do you remember what the sort of state of White Dwarf was in at that time?
Yeah, it was in a very transitional period because like I said, this was simultaneous with them moving from, I'm not sure if they moved from the marketing department or sort of like an independent organism to moving to be a part of the game publication studio.
Mm.
So there was a big structural change, and uh, it was kind of like a fresh start in some ways for White Dwarf, which was a good time for a new face to come in, I guess.
Sure, yeah, yeah. And were you recruiting a new team, or were you working with the existing writers and contributors and to sort of revolutionize the magazine?
We I inherited a team
Mhm.
which I kept,
Right.
and the White Dwarf team is probably their greatest strength. They're all fantastic, super passionate, really hard workers. So I wouldn't have wanted to change a thing even if they'd have asked me to.
Right. Sure. I suppose in 2019 we already would have seen a big shift away from print media, right?
Right, right,
That that journey that we're still on, I think, had already well and truly begun. A lot of magazines moving away. I mean, obviously, over the years, what you would imagine were stable magazines like Dragon magazine for Dungeons and Dragons, like that's long gone. Loads of the other print publications to support the games industry, the wider industry, have shuttered and gone. I mean, was
right.
that a sort of a concern for Games Workshop around White Dwarf? Was it that is there a future for this magazine?
Um, Probably on some level there was some concern, but I think Games Workshop um, is a bit more introspective when it comes to looking at what's happening in the rest of the business climate. I don't think that they look so much at what's happening in the magazine industry. They were
Mm.
kind of like, we're a niche business, we do a niche thing, and it kind of doesn't matter what's happening around us. It just matters how White Dwarf performs. Does White Dwarf do its mission?
Right. Sure. Yeah. And then did you have sort of complete control coming in? Were you able to, like, if you'd wanted to, could you have completely changed everything that was in the magazine, or were there certain things that were, we have to have this?
I had a great deal of creative freedom, but there were definitely limitations. And I had bosses. There was um I don't remember his exact title, but there was like a magazine's director
Mm.
who I reported to. And then he ultimately reported to the studio head. And everything had to go through them, obviously.
Mm.
The biggest constraint, rather than being told what to do or what not to do, was just the resources we had, because we didn't have a staff painter or hobbyist or anything like that. So, or like a hobbyist in terms of like a terrain builder or something like that.
Right.
So that kind of content was a little bit more challenging to create, sort of ironically in a way, I guess, than creating like brand new official rules or something like that.
Right.
Because we had ready access to rules writers and background writers and things like that, but not so easy access to someone who could paint a stage by stage guide, for example.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Because I imagine it's very, like, logistically, it must be very difficult to work across, because you're kind of the public facing, like, organ for Games Workshop to talk about everything it's doing, right? In White Dwarf. But as an organization, it's doing loads of different stuff, and there's all of these different teams who are working on different games, different elements of those games, different things. The production cycles for the games are years ahead, but you've got to align the magazine to what's happening right now and what's being released right now. I mean, what would be the day to day for putting together a single issue? Like, what did that look like logistically?
So the day to day was so varied that it's hard to describe it as a day to day, but
Right.
we worked about, in terms of the magazine we were physically laying out in any given month, we worked about 6 months ahead of real time.
Wow.
And in terms of planning, quite a bit further ahead than that,
Right.
12 to 18 months ahead.
Wow. Right.
And we're looking at release schedules, 2 and 3 years down the road, which you know can can change due to business leads or logistical concerns or whatever. So there
Mm.
was always like the need to be ready to adapt if you had to. But yeah, working on White Dwarf means you're not really living in the present in a way. So when it was sometimes hard to keep track of what's actually out right now and what's yet to come out and
Right.
what is the current rule set or like has this errata been issued or whatever like the game state and the reality of like the product ecosphere is different in the studio and in White Dwarf world than it is like in the real world.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be like really difficult to manage that. Because if you're working 6 months ahead, right, and you're like, okay, we're going to put this mini game or these new rules in, but you already know something will change from what is out in the public right now. That's like, and then you're not able to talk about this to people, and then and there's plans even further ahead for other stuff. That sounds really complicated.
Yeah, it makes battle reports and tactics articles in particular really challenging.
Right,
For battle reports, sometimes we will know and sometimes we won't know that the rules will be different one way or another by the time the magazine actually comes out.
right,
So that was always a challenge. And the same with tactics. We were like, um, because the seasons change every year in terms of the organized play packs and the competitive play packs.
mm,
Um, that leaves you a kind of small window to be able to talk about that season because 6 months into the season, we're making stuff that would come out in the next season.
right.
So yeah, it was always a challenge.
Sure, yeah. I mean, on the battle reports front, are you able to share anything about how that works? Like, would it literally just be you'd play one battle and you'd record it as it was? Did you play multiple and take the best bits, or like was there some other approach to those kinds of things?
Yeah, I'm actually glad you asked that because that's one of the things I love to talk about is the battle reports.
Right,
And the first thing I want to do is dispel the illusion that we like manufacture results to sell models or something like that. Um, I take pride in the fact that we always play one game and report on the results of it because I think that makes it more authentic.
right,
And we don't change die rolls or change the endings of things or come to a scripted ending because I think people would know and I think that would feel inauthentic if, for example, the Leagues of Votan they smashed their opponent in their very first battle report when we were introducing a new army or something like that.
sure.
Um, but no, we try to make it real, and so the battle reports are typically a day-long play session, and they take all day rather than the 1 or 2 hours a 40K game should take or an Age of Sigmar game should take
Hmm,
because there's so much more time involved in pausing to take photographs and um, taking small breaks so that the writer can make sure he's caught everything that's happening. Because the writing job is really difficult. We've got basically a stenographer there who's recording every action in a spreadsheet as it happens, and making notes to himself so that he can recreate an entire narrative, in the following days to write down that battle report for the magazine.
right. Yeah. I mean, how long would it take to actually write up to actually create the battle report itself? So you took a day to play it. Is it a couple of days to then write it?
I would say in all, it takes probably about a week top to bottom. Um, it takes a few hours before the day to to build the battlefield, to assemble the terrain, and make it in such a way that it's um, appropriate for photography. Like one of the things you have to think about when you're doing a battle report is if you put a big building on the front edge of the board, there's going to be loads of stuff that happens during the game that the reader won't be able to see
Mhm.
because they're all behind that building in photography. So you've got to think about sight lines from like the camera's perspective in a way, whilst also maintaining a battlefield that is authentic to the way the game should be played and whatnot.
Sure. Yeah.
And of
Yeah.
course, like you want the battlefield to be beautiful. You want it to be aspirational.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. I,
So that takes a bit of time. And then there's a couple of days that is required for laying everything out. a bit of time for post-processing of all the photography because we take hundreds of pictures of
Mm,
battle report during the course of a day, and then the writing takes 2 or 3 days as well.
sure. Yeah. And then the sort of rest of the content of a given issue, how did you determine like how many column inches to give to like each game? So was it sort of pre-mandated we need this kind of split between like 40K and Age of Sigmar and then however many pages for specialist games, or was it totally like down to what was exciting the team at the time?
There were some guidelines about like the percentage allocation each game should get.
Right.
They were not rigid boxes that you had to stick to, but definitely, there was like this many pages should be 40K, and this many pages should be Age of Sigmar, and this many pages should go to the various specialist games, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm,
And then there's quite a bit of wiggle room, and there's a quite a bit of um, doing it by feel a little bit, and that will vary quite a bit depending on what we think is going to be hot in the release schedule at that moment.
right.
Obviously, like if a new edition has just come out, it's going to get a lot more page space than something else might, for example.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that must make it difficult just thinking as well about like the reaction to things and how people like what does excite the audience and the readership. If you've underestimated how excited a certain release is going to make people, and you're working 6 months ahead, like how much room is there to then go, oh, actually, people are really liking this new release. We should cover it more in some of these issues to capitalize on that.
Yeah, then the question becomes, do we think people are still going to be excited in 6 months?
Right, sure.
So it's a complicated question, really. Uh, I think we were maybe a little bit surprised, for example, how excited people were about the Space Marine 2 video game.
Right,
And because Space Marine 2 wasn't a game we made in-house, obviously, um, we didn't have as much direct access to it in the months ahead. And also because of the release cycle. Like I don't think 6 months before release the game was finished being made.
sure.
So we couldn't talk about a complete game and line it up with the release of the game. And so when we discovered how great it was when it actually came out, because we had to wait just like everyone else. I got to play it on release day.
Right,
Um, when we found out how great that game was and how excited the community was, we, sort of went back and were like, do we think people are still going to be excited in 6 months and a year? And we were like, yes, we think so. We think this game's got some real legs. We think it's awesome. And so then we were planning basically an anniversary issue for Space Marine 2, rather than being able to plan something that was like a big splash to coincide with the initial release.
right, sure, yeah. Because I mean, are those 6 months of issues? Are they locked? Are they just like set in? Once they're done, they're done. You can't go back in and reopen the file and sort of change things and move things around. Is it just not worth doing that?
Well, once a magazine's been okay, so when I say we work 6 months ahead of time,
Mm,
um, basically what happens is we produce an issue in a month's time, and then when that's done, we've got 5 minutes till release date. Let's say, I mean, sorry, 5 months until release date. Let's say.
right,
Then we go to print, and then printing takes a few weeks. Let's call it a month just for simple math.
right,
So now we're 4 months to release date. Oh, sorry, I'm going out of order. First comes translation. So after we produce it, then it's got 2 weeks in translation.
right.
At this point, you can't really change anything because you've put 6 weeks or more of work into the magazine,
Mm,
and immediately on the end of translation, it's going to print. And certainly once it goes to print, you can't change anything.
mm,
So there are cases where we've made like emergency changes to small amounts of the magazine during that translation period or something like that. But that's a pretty extreme circumstance that you don't want to get in the habit of doing
mm,
because we can't afford to put that kind of strain on the translation team or on the production team because we've got to reproduce content while we're also producing the next magazine.
right. Sure, yeah.
And then of course like it goes to print and it ships, and it's in that logistics chain of shipping and being on freight boats across the ocean and stuff for basically like the last 4 months before it shows up on store shelves and in your mailbox. So when I say we're like 6 months ahead of time, it's also just in time. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I suppose it's easy to forget that it's a global magazine as well, right? So it is going to so many different places and has to come out around the same time that, yeah, I guess your lead times are really tight on all of that stuff.
Yeah, and shipping when it comes to freight shipping across oceans takes a tremendous amount of time.
Hmm. Sure. Yeah. When when you were so just thinking back to like, trying to find what we're going to cover in a given issue, the releases that are going to be coming in, so you're presumably tailoring as much as possible of the issue around showcasing these new things, not necessarily in a catalog way, but trying to highlight, okay, the battle report is going to feature Lisa Votan if they've just come out, right? That's
Mhm.
presumably the sort of editorial thinking.
Yeah, and it's more based on, I would say it's more based on what we think people are going to be excited about rather than what we think is currently releasing, if that makes sense.
Okay, right.
And in some ways, like we, in some ways, we don't care what's being released because we don't want to think like a marketing vehicle,
Right.
and because that's what Warcom does, and
Mm,
because Warcom can produce that kind of material closer to real time. So it makes a lot more sense for them. What White Dwarf aims to be is an evergreen magazine that is great no matter when you pick it up. And I think like when you think about your favorite issues, it's not about what was releasing at the time, but a great battle report in it or something like that. Um, so it's less about what's releasing and more about what we think the community is really going to be excited about in that time. And a lot of time, those are the same things
mm,
because we do think like when a new army comes out, that's what the community is going to be excited about. But it's not strictly because it's a new release.
right. Sure. Yeah, I imagine there's also so many releases, right? So it
Right.
must, it must be tough. Like even thinking about like major releases, but like for example, the Old World coming out, right? Which is sort of a major release, but it's also not because it's a specialist game. It's not in the main game. So like how much coverage like are you able to create? How much stuff do you actually want to put into White Dwarf for a game of that nature? And planning that 6 months ahead sounds really hard.
It is really hard. It's hard to predict um, how excited people are going to be, especially for specialist games.
Mm,
And certainly, I I would say just from a personal standpoint, I would always have liked to put more specialist games into the magazine than we were able to, because I'm a big fan of the specialist games in general. Um, but one of the things that we think about when we think about what to put in White Dwarf is um, what most of our readers will be playing and are excited about, and also what most of our readers will have access to.
mm,
And it's not to say that specialist games are inaccessible, but for a lot of customers, they're certainly less accessible
mm,
because they're on fewer shelves. And they're your local game store is much more likely to have a full range of 40K and Age of Sigmar than they are to have of Old World or Legions Imperialis or something like that.
mm.
So one of the things we want to do is we make sure that the magazine feels relevant to our readers as much as possible. And that was just part of the calculus that goes into it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, and that actually just you mentioned Warcom earlier. You were in charge of the magazine for like, roughly 7 years, I think. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah. Six
Yeah.
and a half. Yeah.
So over that time period, like things like the sort of the prominence of Warcom Warhammer community, even the way in which social media is being used, the games that GW are releasing, the old world just wasn't a thing at the start of your time at White Dwarf
Right.
versus where it is now. It's like how did your role and the magazine change, do you think, over that 7 year period, given all of this other change that was happening everywhere else?
I think Maybe it changed less than you might expect.
Right.
I would say you brought up Warcom. I would say Warcom changed more than White Dwarf changed, and
Mm,
I think um, notably Warcom changed in an effort to be more like White Dwarf.
right.
Um, that was, and I'm not editorializing that. That's that's something that the people behind Warcom said to me. They said we want to make stuff more like the stuff that you do in White Dwarf, more in depth, more 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 content, less marketing, if that makes sense.
Right.
Um, More interesting journalistic reads, things of that nature.
Sure.
Um, White Dwarf, I think, sort of had its guiding star, and that never really changed. Um, what I thought was what the magazine strived to be or should be didn't change a lot because while, like you said, the world around it changed, like what people want of Warhammer, I don't think has changed very much, really.
Mm, sure. Yeah. I mean, you're like, I mean, obviously the magazine has gone through all kinds of like ups and downs over its entire life. Lots of big changes. When you look at your tenure, are there any major changes that you sort of look back at are proud of and think of, okay, that's one of my major contributions to its history.
Yeah, there's definitely loads of stuff that I'm really proud of during my time there. A lot of it's on the creative side. We created the Tome Keepers Space Marine chapter for White Dwarf, and we did it in a way that gave a real inside look into how we as a studio create a new bit of IP, how we create a Space Marine chapter.
Hmm,
And we left our readers a blueprint basically to create their own Space Marine chapters. So while telling people how we thought was, how it was our way of making a Space Marine chapter so that they could follow by numbers,
hmm,
we created one at the same time in front of their eyes. Um, and the Tone Keepers are brilliant. I think they're a great Space Marine chapter, and we have loads of readers and even people who aren't White Dwarf readers who love the Tome Keepers, and the Tome Keepers have become a part of the lore in a small way, but they're part of the whole universe, and they're even in things like Space Marine 2, which is really
hmm,
awesome. We also brought back Grombrindle, the White Dwarf himself, who was an old world character,
hmm.
but we resurrected him. Basically, Grungni uh, reforged him out of his own legends and the legends of the Duardin into a resurrected and reincarnated Grombrindle in the mortal realms. And that created, it brought back a beloved character, which was awesome because I think we needed our mascot in his fully fleshed version and in all of his presence. Um, and it ended up with some beloved Black Library stories telling of his stories, and then it created it led to the spawning of the new Grombrindle miniature that came out in White Dwarf 500,
Hmm.
which I'm really proud of because I got to write the concept brief for that model, and it became the best-selling limited edition model in Games Workshop history, and that's
Wow.
awesome.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's got to be cool to like to be able to add to these worlds and to sort of just put something new into these spaces and knowing that then is going to get picked up and explored by lots of other creatives and in lots of different ways. Like you say, Black Library are going to do something. The studio is going to make a miniature, all this kind of stuff. That's got to be like really cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, really proud of White Dwarf 500. Really proud of some of the ways we sort of expanded what people might think of the hobby in terms of like what is the hobby. We did some things to we created articles about like how to do better photography, or we even did one that followed the methods and work of an artist who's very skilled at taking photographs of models and painting over them so that they look like beautiful illustrations. Scott says Artist Empire on Twitter X. Check him out. His work is fantastic. Um, and and sort of expanding what you think of as Warhammer, and introducing people to these other like beautiful expressions of the hobby was really exciting.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it is such a big hobby, isn't it? There's so many different facets and so many ways into Warhammer to spend your time in Warhammer. There's lots of different ways to sort of invest in it.
Right, absolutely.
Is there anything that you look back from your tenure and sort of think, okay, that was a really significant challenge, or I would have tackled that differently now, or anything like that?
I'll tell you, definitely the one of the big significant challenges. I wouldn't say I'd tackle it differently because we handled it really successfully, I think. But as I told you from the jump, my first day was January 2nd, 2019.
Hmm.
And you probably remember from 2019 famously, that was the COVID outbreak, or the end of
Of course.
2019 was. Um, so we weren't sure what was going to happen during COVID, like the rest of the world. And lockdown seemed like an imaginary thing that would never actually happen
Sure.
before it did happen. And I remember us having about 3 days notice that the office would close at the end of the week and people wouldn't be working for the foreseeable future. They were just shutting the office down completely. The magazine that we were working on when we got that notification was the launch issue for, I believe, ninth edition of Warhammer 40K.
Right.
And as part of this decision making to shut down the office, the decision was also made to delay the launch of ninth edition 40K because the world was going to be shut down.
Hmm.
And so we were 3 days or so away from going to translation with a magazine that was loaded with content about ninth edition, and ninth edition wasn't going to come out. And so we had to replace about 66 pages of magazine in 3 days, including a battle report, which we talked about how long that takes.
Sure.
Um, and so it was a mad scramble. But for the people who picked up that issue, the issue as it actually came out, I doubt anyone knew that this was supposed to be a 40K launch issue and that there was loads of replacement content stuff because credit to the team, everyone pulled together and did such a good job of creating so much content that was up to the standards of White Dwarf, what you expect of White Dwarf in so little time. And I'm really proud of that moment.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's impressive. Because was there any interruption to White Dwarf coming out, or did it stay on schedule throughout that entire time?
There were two issues that didn't come out that year.
Right.
So that was a 10 issue year. And it wasn't because of our capacity to produce them. It was because during those 2 months, and I think it was June and July
Hmm.
of 2020, the stores were literally closed. There was nowhere you could buy it.
Hmm.
And that's why we didn't do 12 issues that year. Um, there's just, I mean, there were some stores open in some countries, but for by and large, from a worldwide perspective, retail just wasn't happening at a in-person brick and mortar level, during that time.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what's the I suppose did you start like keeping a few battle reports in the drawer just in case for the future after that, or any other content? Like, just we'll have a couple of articles we can use.
Well, that was one of the ways we actually were able to be successful is that we did have a little bit of a slush fund of articles
Right.
to call back on. So you've always got to have something in the bag. It doesn't it doesn't take a pandemic to cause us to need to pull out a 6 or 12 page article or something. So it's always good to have like something ready in the tank.
Sure. Yeah. At the end of your time at White Dwarf, do you know what the circulation was at that point?
It fluctuates quite a bit. So we saw we saw growth going into the pandemic, a little bit of growth through the pandemic, really, because we were a great hobby for people who were stuck in their houses. But at the same time, we saw a lot of condensing of the magazine industry during that time and after, like it kind of accelerated in some ways.
Mm,
And that actually does have a bit of a knock-on effect for White Dwarf, even though, like I said, I don't think we necessarily like factor that a lot into our decision making. And it's mostly because it has an impact on the newsstand, like the physical newsstand itself.
right.
Um, in some ways, because White Dwarf was growing relative to the magazine industry, we we moved up the newsstand rankings
Mm,
and continually got like better shelf placement as a result, even up till the very end.
right.
Um, uh, and by the very end, I mean like the end of my tenure.
Sure.
Um, but at the same time, some newsstands were shutting down altogether, or less shelf space in stores were devoted to newsstands or magazine sections and stuff like that.
Right.
And and therefore less mind share of consumers was going to magazines during this time and still. But White Dwarf weathered that really well and grew through it. And in terms of rankings and in terms of relativity to the magazine industry, it was always growing.
Sure. Right. Yeah. Because I guess if White Dwarf is remaining stable or relatively stable through that time, which is a remarkable feat at all, just especially given the wider context, but the entire market is shrinking for printed media, then you are only going to take on more and more like prominence, aren't you? You're going to be a bigger proportion of sales, but from a smaller total sales number.
Right. And let me add, during the pandemic and afterwards, um, print companies were hit really hard, like printers.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of printers shut down, and that was like a sort of chicken and the egg scenario where um, a lot of print media was shutting down, so there was less print volume going through printers, and a lot of printers were shutting down. So print the printing resource became more expensive
Hmm.
for publishers. So they sort of fed into each other that both made the market harder for the other one. And so magazines are more expensive to produce by quite a bit now
Right.
than they were before because of the contraction of both the magazine industry and the print industry.
Sure.
By which I mean like printers. A
Yeah.
lot of printers either shut down or transitioned into making things like packaging, like boxes for Amazon and stuff like that.
Right, sure. I mean, have you got any sort of broader thoughts about the landscape of magazines and that kind of publication? Like, where do you see things going over the next, say, 10 years?
Oh, it's hard to predict what's going to happen in 10 years. Like
Hmm,
let's take AI for example.
sure.
I I certainly didn't predict how quickly AI would infiltrate our lives, you
Hmm,
know? So it's and like if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I certainly that wasn't on my bingo card.
hmm,
But so one of the interesting things about the magazine industry is that a lot of general traditional publications are shrinking in size in circulation. I'm talking about like former giants like Time Magazine and National Geographic and People and all those kinds of things who still have quite large circulations.
hmm,
But there's a part of the magazine sector that is still growing. And basically, the more niche your magazine is, the more likely it is to actually be in growth and to be doing just fine.
right.
Um, So I think there's definitely still a place and an appetite for magazines. And I think counterintuitively, the internet sort of uh, helps magazines and the need for magazines because um, when you think about concepts like the 24-hour news cycle and things like that that exist because of television and the internet, the attention span of any given community or like the zeitgeist or whatever is dwindling to be so small, and
Mm,
there's so much content coming at you from the internet that you have to be really, really plugged in all the time to not miss something,
mm,
because as soon as something comes out on the internet, it's replaced by something new.
yeah.
But what magazines do a really good job of is curating the important stuff that you don't want to miss. And it helps you stay plugged in without making staying plugged in a job for you.
Mm,
So I think even if it's sort of distilling and curating the best things you might find on the internet, or making those things findable, or um, bringing light to the things that might disappear rather quickly because of how quickly the internet turns over. That's things that magazines will always be really good at.
sure, yeah. And it's a really interesting point, actually. And that relationship with the internet being so, under strain in a way, and perhaps even with the proliferation of generative AI and the degradation of information on the internet, actually, magazines and, like you say, that curated, hopefully more reliable information that you can get in the printed form becomes more valuable again.
That's an excellent point.
Yeah, it could go in that direction. So yeah, very fascinating. I mean, do you think that there's the obviously there's changes at White Dwarf and sort of um, moving into the space that they are going into now? Does that reflect any of the broader changes that you've seen, or is that just one of these things where you know every organization is going to make changes and sort of evolve all the time?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think, definitely they think that they can, at the end of the day, it's a business like any other one, right?
Mm,
And if they think that they can make a product more cheaply, then that's a route that a business might take 9 times out of 10.
sure.
So if they have one less person working on it, um, and they think that they can maintain the quality by doing so, then I suppose that's what the thinking is. Um, it's pretty unprecedented, obviously, to make a magazine without a managing editor or an editor in chief or something like that. But they have. My team was a great team. The White Dwarf team was fantastic. They'll continue to do a fantastic job, and hopefully, the people around them can pick up the slack that will need to be picked up because I'm not there anymore.
Mm, sure, yeah. I mean, do you know what your sort of future looks like? Do you want to continue in the hobby magazine space, or are you looking just more broadly? And well, what does the future hold for Lyle?
Yeah, this is actually a really exciting time for me because it gives me the opportunity to step back, and I'm kind of in a luxury position that I don't need to rush into the next thing.
Mm,
But what I've decided to do for now is just to work for myself for a bit, go freelance, be my own boss, and pick up projects that are interesting and exciting to me and that I'm passionate about. And maybe bring to market some projects of my own. Like I've got some product ideas that I'm working on, and that would be really exciting. That would be just as big a dream to tick off as working on White Dwarf was.
mm.
So, I'm really excited about that kind of stuff as well.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, so hobbyists have definitely not seen the last of you then.
Oh no, I'll still be a part of the hobby industry for sure.
Fantastic. Well, Lyle, thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me. It's been really great, and yeah, I feel like I've learned so much. So thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Many thanks to Lyle for joining me to chat about his time at Games Workshop working on White Dwarf. It was a genuinely fascinating conversation. I am so grateful for his time. If you would like to support the work I do here on the channel, documenting, researching and creating videos about the history of Warhammer and interviewing the people who helped to bring it to life since its very beginning, then you can do so by checking out my Patreon, patreon.com/Jordan Sorcery. There you will find early and exclusive content, research articles, podcasts, and lots of other fun stuff as well. Thank you once again to Lyall. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.